Hello and welcome to our weekly Parsha share with the commentary of the Alshich Series. I do apologize for not being with you last week. Let me just adjust my camera and bring it a bit closer. Make a better picture, I think. Yes, I'm a little bit pale in this. What can we do? Should we turn this off? We don't need this light. So let's get rid of that. Any second now. Yes, light's gone off. Yes, I think that makes it a little bit better for those who are watching me. Apologize for not being with you last week for the Parsha. As you can probably still hear, I have flu. This is, of course, as a consequence of having the flu injection 2 weeks before. But one of these things. Okay. As they say, Menschen trachten the Eberste lacht. Man makes plans and HaShem laughs. Or as I once heard somebody say, if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. So there is an injection against flu, and then you get the flu. If you'd like to sponsor the share any week for to commemorate somebody who's passed away or to celebrate a Jewish Simcha as normal, it's not as normal. I was going to say it's the normal address, yy@rabbiyyy.com, but it's not because somebody has hacked into my and stolen my webpage, so I've lost that email address. It's now yy@askrabbiyyy.com. So if you want to email me at yy@askrabbiyyy.com, you can be the first to do that. You'll make history. That's the first new emails. Oh, I'm feeling a bit stuffy and my head's a bit groggy, so I hope this year will go as well as I hope I meant it to. All right, this week's Parsha is the Parsha of Boi. And it's obviously culminates in the death of the firstborn of Mitzrayim, and then the Jewish people leaving, and the end of the long and bloody and bitter exile. We are going to be looking at Parsha's Yud Gimel, and Parsha's Yud Gimel in Pasuk Aleph, and it talks really about three things. It talks about the Becharim, firstborn. It talks about the Exodus itself, obviously with the final touches, as it were, and wearing tefillin. But I'd like to concentrate a little bit on the firstborn, the death of the firstborn, or rather not the death of the firstborn, the mitzvah of Becharim, the mitzvah of that the firstborn is dedicated to HaShem, belongs to HaShem, has to be redeemed by the Kohen, etc. And delve into that a little bit, or rather let the Alshich delve into that a little bit through his very, very strong magnifying glass that sees every detail. So it's Yud Gimel and it's Pasuk Aleph, and I think it'd probably be useful if I just read this to you. So let's start, and then we'll see that it's very disjointed. And the Alshich is going to discuss this, but I'm going to start off and let the cat out of the bag, or gives you a heads up, whichever is the appropriate thing to say. And it says, "V'yadaber Hashem al Moshe lemor," Gimel Aleph, and Hashem speaks to Moshe, and he says, "Kaddish li kol bechor." I would like you've got to sanctify to me every bechor, every firstborn. Peter kol rechem, the person who is the first person to open his mother's womb. B'nei Israel, amongst the Jewish people. Ba'odam u'bahema li hu, whether human being or whether animal, the firstborn belongs to me. And of course, firstborn already belonged to Hashem, had a special role in Klal Yisrael. Reuben was the firstborn. Had it not been for the golden calf, then it would have been that the firstborn would have been the Levium, and the Kohanim would have performed that role in the Beis Hamikdash. But of course, that passed to the Shevet Levi, to the tribe of Levi. So it's already from this time of Reuven a special role, a special connection between firstborn and Hashem Yisborach. And we'll see an incredibly interesting Kabbalistic insight from the Alshich as well as to the exact nature, or not, rather an aspect of the nature of that closeness of that relationship. So Kaddish li kol bechor, kol rechem b'nei Yisrael, ba'odem u'bahema hi, so it belongs to me. Fine. Vayama Moshe el ha'am. So again, getting that instruction from Hashem, it would seem to be that Moshe should then pass on the laws of the Becharim. So that's Pasuk Aleph, Yud Gimel Aleph. But he doesn't.
In fact, he only does so. We're going to take a diversion, or rather, Moshe is going to take a diversion, and we come back to it in Pasuk Yud Aleph. So 11 psukim later, and there it says. So we're missing out a bit, but then if I was to write the book, as it were, what you would expect the Torah to say next is Pasuk Yud Aleph. When it says, when Hashem takes the land of the Canaani, he takes the land of the Canaanites, which he promised to your forefathers, and gives you it, called Peter Rechem. And then it will be, I'll speed this up by reading the English rather than just translating and then saying the English. I'll just read Rabbi Art Scroll's translation here. And it shall come to pass when Hashem will bring you to the land of the Canaanites, as he swore to you and your forefathers, and he will have given it to you, that you shall set apart every first issue of the womb to Hashem, and every first issue that is dropped by a livestock that belong to you, the males are Hashem's. Every first issue donkey you shall redeem with a lamb or a kid, and if you do not redeem it, you shall axe the back of its head, and you shall redeem every human firstborn amongst your sons. And that shall be when your son will ask you some future day, what's all this? You will say with a strong hand, Hashem, remove me from the land of Egypt and the house of bondage. Right, that's how you would expect it to carry on. Because first Pasuk says, Moshe, tell them about the Mitzva of the firstborn. And then he takes a diversion and comes back to it in Pasuk 10. What's the diversion and why is the diversion? So I'm going to come back to that shortly, and then we'll go through the Alshich and ask some of his questions and come to some of his answers. But I think I have to set a bit of a scene for the theme that I'd like us to explore through the eyes of the Alshich this week. And the theme takes us to a Pasuk in Yeshayahu. That would be a very good introduction. It's a very, very well-known Pasuk, and we read it in the Haftarah just a few weeks ago. In Yeshayahu, Isaiah, of course, that is in English, chapter Nun Hey, 55, and it's Pasuk Ches. Ki loy mashavasai mashavasechem. No, it's Hashem speaking to the prophet Yeshayahu, and he says to him, the way I think is not the way that you think. And the way you do things is not the way I do things. Nu'um Hashem, Hashem promises, states, perhaps maybe the translation in this case. So there's Hashem's making it quite clear. We see things differently, which I suppose is hardly a piece of news. It's just the one that we never think about. If you'd ask them, do you think Hashem sees things differently to you? The answer would be, of course. But that, of course, is something I think we don't really ponder too much. And it's a very important point to take. Now, of course, it's the opposite way about. The role of the Jew is to try and emulate God. The Pasuk says, and you should go in his ways. Or, as we'll read next week in the Parsha, when the Jewish people sing the famous song at the splitting of the sea and the drowning of the Egyptians, then it says, Ze keli va'anvehu, this is my God, va'anvehu, and I will honor him. However, the rabbi split the word va'anihu into ani v'hu, I and him, ani va'anvehu, ani and I and him. In other words, I should be like him. No, that doesn't mean, of course, ridiculously, that you're trying to be a god, but rather what it's saying is that you are. Oh my goodness, I've lost my page. Oh, that's right. Hold on. Sorry, we've got a tiny computer crisis going on here. Thank you. And maybe if I press the right button, make the screen a little bit lighter, that will be better. It's not trying to make you assume that you are, there's no apotheosis going on here, that you're promoting yourself to the role of a god. What it means is the approach, the way Hashem sees things. That's how you should behave. You should try and see it through God's eyes, despite the fact that God obviously sees it different to you. So you try and take his perspective. And the Torah in this week's Parsha, we'll see through the eyes of the Alshich, is, or rather Hashem, in what he's about to tell Moshe. And Moshe's approach is allowing us, or trying to allow us to do that, to see things through Hashem's eyes. Below Mashavasai, Mashavasech. Because the way I see things is different than the way you see things. Rabbi Dessler where we come to the Alshich in the fourth volume of Mitzva. This is my old one, rebound. And my Mitzva, gosh, goes back to when I was a teenager, I think, about this. So that's just a short time ago. And then it's a Medrash Rabbah, which starts with our famous Lo Masha Basai Masha Basekim. And the Medrash Rabbah says the following thing: Rabbi Simon b'shem Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Simon, in the name of Rabbi Eliezer, says, Amar Bo Arba Shitim. There are four examples, perhaps I'll translate it that way, which illustrate how Hashem sees things differently to us. With regards to chesed, mitzvah of chesed. Mihu, says the Medrash, Mihu, who is it? She'also chesed imishalo hoyivtzrichim. Who was it that did chesed to somebody who doesn't need chesed or didn't need chesed? And the answer is Abram im Malach Yasharas. Abram were the angels who came to visit him the third day after his bris milah, and he ran and had prepared a meal for them, gave them the most beautiful food, which of course, these were only angels in appearing as human beings, in physical form. They weren't real. So therefore the food that they were eating was not really being consumed. It was only appearing to be consumed. And yet for that act of kindness, which was no act of kindness at all, because it produced absolutely nothing, but for the intent of the kindness, then in giving food to people who didn't need food, then Avram Avinu got from that his children would have food and water in the desert for 40 years, which seems a rather generous reward for something which seems to be, well, ultimately a nothing, something that was nothing at all, or produced nothing at all, but actually produced that. Now, we normally generally assess chesed by the impact that it has on somebody. He did a great chesed to somebody. He built them a home after their home burned down. Whoa, that's not how Hashem looks at it. It's not the result, it's the intention to produce the result. So that's how Hashem looks at, not the way we look at it. As a good example of this concept we're talking about. And therefore obviously, we should try and look at it that way as well. The person tried, it might not have turned out, but Mashava Kamaisa, thinking about it as though the person did it, that would be one example. Example number two, and it carries on the theme. Right, so Avram, who did chesed with people who didn't need it and got all that reward, who didn't do chesed with people who didn't need it and got punished badly for it? Well, that was Ammon and Moab. So Ammon and Moab, cousins of Urj, nephew of Avram Avinu is Lot. Avram saves Lot's life through in two occasions from after the capture of the four kings, the battle of the four kings and the five kings, and when Lot and the population of Sodom are taken prisoner, Avram rescues him, and also for the destruction of Sodom, it was in the schus and the merit of Avram. So Lot only has an existence through Avram, and Moab and Ammon are the direct descendants of Lot, cousins of ours. And yet, when the Jewish people came out of the desert on their way to take possession of the long-promised land of Israel, after the Exodus 40 years later, and Moab did not offer hospitality, did not bring bread and water to the Jewish people emerging from the desert. And you might say cynically, well, big deal, who cares? They didn't need the Moabite water or bread. After all, they had miraculous food and water that accompanied them. So therefore, they didn't offer it to people who didn't need it. So what's the big deal about that? The answer is Hashem saw it as being a very big deal, because you didn't want to, you didn't try to, even though they didn't need it. So even if you'd offered it, it would have been ultimately, again, nothing. But you failed to offer. And as a consequence, the male Moabites who failed in that regard were banned forever for joining the Jewish people. Again, we wouldn't see it like that. We would see it as, well, it was a nothing. The people didn't need it. That's not the point. That's not the way Hashem looks at it. Two more examples. Turn the page. And this incident, I should have said, this is in the Chelik Dalet. It's the first thing Rabbi Dessler is, first essay of Rabbi Dessler in there. Yesh Alshich Chesed Mishum Choiva, Skara Harbe. Mihu she'alshich chesed imi shechayev le. Who did do chesed to somebody who was obliged to do chesed to? The answer is Yisro. After all, Moshe had just saved his daughter's lives They were threatened by those shepherds. They tried to assault them, violate them, and drown them. Moshe saves them, and Yisro offered him hospitality and took him into his home. Well, he owed him one, though. I mean, 7 daughters, 7 lives saved, his only 7 offspring, his existence in the planet, his ongoing existence through his progeny guaranteed solely by the intervention of Moshe. Surely you owe him one. But the reward for giving, for paying back, for recognizing that debt and honoring that debt to Moshe was, of course, rather enormous. Yisro's reward is a whole Parsha in the Torah named after him, allowed to become part of Klal Yisrael and to contribute to Klal Yisrael. It's a rather big reward. And you might think, well, it shouldn't be. I mean, he owed one. It doesn't deserve really anything. That's not how HaShem looks at it. And the last one is Mish, who also chesed, Mish, tzorech chesed. Who did chesed with somebody who needed chesed? That was Boaz with Rus. Boaz gave to this impoverished girl, ex-princess, Moabite princess, food to eat after the harvest and drink, and the reward, he becomes the father of the Mashiach. That's big. I mean, he did a nice thing, but to be the father of the Mashiach, HaShem views it differently. So the way HaShem looks at things is the way we're supposed to look at things as well. But this is perhaps a little bit deep, a little bit unexpected, a much more mundane level. How HaShem looks at things and how we look at things. I once heard a story. My Rosh Yeshiva was Reb Leib Lapian, the Chatzar of Rosh Yeshiva of Gateshead. There were 2 Rosh Yeshiva in Gateshead, brothers-in-law, Reb Leib Gurevitz and Reb Leib Lapian, sons-in-law, of course, of the famous Reb Elia Lapian. And there was a famous story told in Gateshead of a young man who arrived in Yeshiva. He was a genius, an Eloi, a fabulous person whose abilities in Torah were outstanding, whose talents in Torah and whose spiritual growth and character refinement growth was well noted. And after 2 or 3 years, his father, who ran a big business warehouse of some sort in London, needed his son to come back to help him with the business. But this would be to snuff out the remarkable career of this young man, who Reb Leib Lapian felt could easily become one of the next Rosh Yeshiva of the generation, one of the next Gedolei Ador. And so basically he went down to plead on his Talmud's behalf with his parents to extend his stay in Gateshead by another year. And they agreed. And he stayed for another year. And after a year, the pressure of the father was becoming unbearable. And again, they wanted to bring him from yeshiva. And again, Reb Leib went down and managed to get another extension. Eventually, if I recall correctly, the boy did eventually go down to London. And just a very short space after that, a week or 2, the father died of a heart attack. When Reb Leib went down to the yeshiva house, obviously the mother was very distressed. And in her distress was extremely obvious in her displeasure and anger at Reb Leib Lapian, blaming him for the death of her husband. Had he, she felt, let her son come home 2 years previously, her husband would have been under such terrible stress, the stress which she was sure, and probably was, a factor in leading to his death. It was all his fault. Of course, Reb Leib, being a Talmud a son of his father, a Talmud of his father, Talmud of Kelm, said nothing. And somebody afterwards, probably a long time afterwards, after the mother had calmed down, said to her, you got it completely wrong. You see, had you brought your son to help his father 2 years earlier, then 2 weeks after he came back 2 years earlier is when your husband would have died. The fact that you allowed your son to stay in yeshiva and supported him in yeshiva for those 2 years of learning Torah generated another 2 years of life for your father, for the boy's father, for your husband. A different way of looking at it. It's essential to try and gain the perspective of HaShem Yisborach. And with that, we can come to the Alshich in the 6th Parsha, because it's really showing us how we look at things with regards to the B'charim, and how Hashem wants us to look at things. But it takes a little bit of a close analysis of the psukim to see that. So if you do have, I'm not putting it on the screen, if you do have a chumash to hand, then it would be useful to have a look. But don't worry, I shall try my best as we go through it. So let's remind ourselves how we started this. Yud Gimel Aleph, it starts off by Hashem telling Moshe to tell the Jewish people of the ongoing mitzvah of the firstborn being given to Hashem. That they are his, and this is a mitzvah of redeeming the firstborn that will last throughout all the generations. And then we said Moshe, instead of taking that fact and telling that to Jewish people, he goes off at a tangent, or he says different things before he gets round, if that's not sounding too disrespectful, before he gets to that, then he takes them in a different direction. Let's see where they go. Hashem says to Moshe, Kaddish es kol bechor peter kol rechem b'nei Yisrael. That's Pasuk Aleph, Pasuk Beis. Then sanctify every firstborn who are the first ones to open the womb of the mother within Bnei Yisrael, but Adam or Behema, whether man or animal, lihi, they belong to me. And now Moshe's diversion. The Yom Moshe El Ha'am. And Moshe says to the Jewish people, Zachoris Yom Hazeh, remember this day. Asher Yotzeis Mitzrayim. Says in Mitzrayim, when you went out from Mitzrayim. What happened to telling us about the Bacharim later on? And the base of body from the house of bondage. I think they translated that, wasn't it? Yeah, the house of bondage from the house of slavery. Because it was a very strong hand Hashem took you out from this place. And don't eat chometz. Well, this is definitely tangentially. Now he's going to talk about the mitzvah of matzah and chometz, but not talking about the mitzvah of Bacharim. Today you went out in Chodesh Aviv, in the month of the spring. So Nisan is the beginning of spring. And when Hashem takes you to the land of all these peoples, that Hashem Ishbala, which you promised to your fathers, this loch to give to you, Eretz Zavas Chavas L'Davash. Notice it's swapped to the singular. Oh, Hashem Ishbata Lava Secha, to your father. Lases Lecha, to give to you, singular, not Lechem. Eretz Zavas Chavas L'Davash, Vavadata, you, singular. Will serve Avodah says, do this, all these mitzvahs, B'chodesh Hazeh. Shilas Yamim Tochel Matzahs. 7 days you'll eat matzahs. Still gone off at a tangent. On the 7th day, Chag Lashem. The 7th day, that's Chag Lashem. Matzahs Yochel Kol Shilas Yamim. Matzah time, 7 days. And you won't see, it won't appear. Nor will you see any leavening throughout your land, your borders, throughout the time of Passover. Long way away from the mitzvah that he's supposed to be telling them about. And a different tangent. And you'll tell it to your sons, on that day, Lamar, because of this. Also, Hashem did for me when he took me out from Egypt. And now more tangents. So we've dealt with the mitzvah of matzah, and now we're going on to the mitzvah of tefillin. And you'll bind these words on your hands, zikran beinenecha, and it should be the tefillin between your eyes and your head. Laman tiyeh Torah Hashem b'picha, so that the Torah of Hashem will be in your lips. Ki biyad chazaka ha'seyecha Hashem in Mitzrayim. It was a strong hand Hashem took you out from Egypt. And you'll keep these forever and ever, from year to year. Right? Pesach will be a perpetual celebration. And then Moshe and Pasuk Yud Aleph goes back to do what Hashem told him to do, which is how we read at the beginning. Second, he promised to your father, and gives it to you. Then you'll bring Kol Peter Rechem, all the firstborn, and they belong to Hashem. And then he goes on, as we said before, and elaborates exactly what's concerned with that mitzvah. So the question is, why does it go off a tangent? So let's just turn back to Yud Aleph and let me read to you some questions from the Alshich. I think I better need that, keep that near to hand. I can move over there if I move my little mouse. If my anti-flu medication holds up. And so here we've got a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 questions, which we're going to at least announce. I hope to get to. The Alshich asks, in actual fact, quickly looking here, 22, but often these are subdivided into more than one. So 22 of, and this is on 11, as we said, 11 psukim. So therefore, it's 2 questions per posuk would be the average. And we're not going to read 22, but I will read some. Okay, let's look at his question number 1. And again, it would be very useful if you could see this inside. Let's remind you where it says, V'yidaber Hashem al Moshe lemor, Kaddish li kol b'char. You will sanctify to me, kol b'char, all the firstborn, Peter, kol rechem b'nei Yisrael, those who opened the womb, brought life into the world by opening their mother's womb. But Adam, Behema, Lihu, they belong to me. Lihu. Says the Alshich, Ki achas shekol b'char lo yizborach. Who ka'amro lihu? If you're saying it already belongs to you, that says lihu. Ich yama kaddish li, havim elav kaddishu. So what does it mean? You will sanctify to me. If they already belong to Hashem, which the same posuk makes very clear they do, they already are holy because they belong to Hashem. So why did it say that? A good question, I think. Question 2, for Chanies. At the beginning, it's talking about the following. It says, you should sanctify all the firstborn of Bnei Yisrael. And then it says, the man and an animal, they belong to me. But you just said that we got to sanctify all the firstborn in Bnei Yisrael. So it should just say, what's this? Ba'odam or behema? Not a good question. 3. Omer b'nei Yisrael, shehu miyusa. No, it's the same question really. Or maybe I anticipated it. Jumped the gun, as they say. Ki vadai she'alehem yudaber. Yeah, obviously they belong to Hashem, so it was more or less I said, so I will apologize for that one. Daled Omer, Zachor es hayom hazeh. Then it goes on to say, remember this day. Remember this day. So what's it saying? Yom hazeh. Remember the going out from Egypt. So, sorry, we seem to have gone off at a tangent within the tangent. We've gone off at. Again, Omar Zocher is Hayom Hazeh, Ama Inyan Hayom Yom Zocher Yitzia. Seem to be the remembering. Got to remember the going out from Egypt. Okay, and then hey, I think am I doing hey? Did I want to do a hey? Let's see what I said. Yes, according to me, I want to dalit. Zeh. Omar Zocher is Yom Hazeh. Ma Inyan Hayom Yom Zocher Yitzia. That him. But Omar may base upon it. Yes. Why did it say? May base of Odim. Remember this day that God took you from the base of Odim. What was the art scrolls from the house of bondage, from the house of slavery. Show your loyal lover should say, may he use a body. Remember this day when Hashem took you out from being slaves. What's from base of Odim? Okay. Yes, and one more. And it says, Shemetchila Omer Asher Yitzeisom Shemor B'Kiyes Me'atzum. The beginning it says, it's as though you went out yourself, because what says, Hayom Atam Yotzim HaKodesh Avos. You got to Hayom, this day you went out from Egypt. You went out. Sometimes they did it themselves. Later on, what does it say? It says, Bavor Zeh, Hashem, also Hashem li b'tzeisim Israel. It's because of this, all the matzah and stuff we mentioned, that God took me out. Oh, so who took them out? So those are the questions he asked. Maybe if you're watching this, you want to pause and rewind them so the questions are clear. However, I'm going to jump straight into the Alshich, assuming that you've done that or you're clear to begin with, and so you can revisit them later. But I think even if we move straight on, even without revisiting them, you will still be with me in this. Okay, And again, the theme that we're looking at is you'll see it differently to the way HaShem sees it. And he doesn't want you to. He wants you to look at it through my eyes. With this surprise, perhaps, the same surprise answer that lady received when she was angry with the Rosh Hashiva. You're looking at the wrong way. Your husband had an extra 2 years of life because your son stayed in yeshiva. Not because he stayed in yeshiva. His life was cut short. It was lengthened. So that's a sort of perspective that the Alshich is trying to drive us towards here. Now, the Alshich is going to quote a medrash, which he almost always does, when he's explaining the psukim which seem to be strange or difficult. And of course, we've now got a diversion to explain here. And Niskar Maimon Zala says in Bechilta, so medrash in Bechilta says, Alaposik v'hoyalachem lemishmeres. The Jewish people had to take the lamb and, of course, tie it to the foot of the bed and keep it there for a period of time to mishmeres, to be guarded there. And Rabbi Matin ben Charish says, Omer Hagia Shavua Shenishbel HaKadosh Baruch Hu es Bonov. The time had come when the promise that Hashem had made to Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov had to be fulfilled. The promise to take his children out, their children out from Eretz Yisrael, to Eretz Yisrael. But they had no mitzvahs, no zechusim, no merit, no justification to allow him, as it were, in the face of complaints from the angels in heaven, to actually rescue the Jewish people from Mitzrayim. And indeed, he brings the Apostle Yecheskel to sign Ches. It was a special time of affection and love, the claiming of that promise, the fulfillment of that promise. Elisha at you were naked, and you were naked with mitzvahs. You had not one stitch of a mitzvah to wear to justify taking you out. So therefore, that's why you had two mitzvahs to do. The two mitzvahs you had to do was the mitzvah of Bris Milah and the mitzvah of the Korban Pesach, taking the Passover lamb and tying it to the foot of the bed, and then taking the blood and putting it on the doorpost. That generated for you the schus to be able to be taken out. Now remember, and we'll come to this shortly, and we'll come back to this theme, that the god of Egypt was the lamb. The lamb is a symbol, the animal is a symbol of the star sign, the astrological sign called the Tleh, the sheep or the ram. You find that in the non-Jewish astrological symbols, which are the same as ours, incidentally. And that mazel was the mazel which the Egyptians were able, that planetary, the extra-planetary forces that came to this world, they were able to take and manipulate to do the incredible things that they could do. Then that was the god that the Egyptians worshipped and the Jews worshipped too. Remember, we were sunk in non-Jewish society, non-Jewish perspective, non-Jewish philosophy and idolatry. And therefore, taking the god, which previously they'd worshipped, and tie it to the foot of the bed, cut its throat, cook it, and eat it, there's no greater demotion of a god when you actually chew it and swallow it. That was a symbol of the Jewish people rejecting what the Egyptians had so cleverly seduced them into believing. Okay, and therefore that's why there was these two mitzvahs. That's what the Medrash says. So the two mitzvahs were in order to equip or to clothe the Jewish people in a mantle of mitzvahs, so that it would be justified to take them out from Egypt. Fine, so far so good. Now, of course, by putting the blood in the door, having done these two mitzvahs, that protected the firstborn of Egypt, of the Jewish people, from the fate of the firstborn of Egypt, because they are going to die for their idolatrous and horrible behavior. But if we're doing the exact same thing, why shouldn't the firstborn of the Jewish people die too? Apparently, the Parsha is quite clear. This protected the Jewish people from that fate. The Passover lamb and Bris Milah. The two mitzvahs would protect them from the fate of the Jewish firstborn and the fate of the Egyptian firstborn. And so the Alshich says, but Nobel al Bir we should consider this idea by thinking is the following. Manzeh hoyo al Moshe Rabbeinu Shalom hu yizbarach emor alav lemor mitzvahs peter rechem. He asked the question we started off with. What's going on in Moshe's mind? If Hashem tells you to tell them the mitzvah of Bechorim, and he's a prophet, so Hashem has programmed into him exactly what that mitzvah is, why doesn't he relate it? Why does he take this tangent? What's the word? Shortcut, not shortcut. What's the word? When you go off at a different direction. Why doesn't he go off at a different direction? Why does he go off in a different direction? And he addresses different topics instead of going straight back to the idea of the first one. And then he returns to the theme that he was originally told to pursue. And not in the same way that Hashem had told him to do so. He should have just said, God spoke to me, and this is what I'm going to do. But Hashem told him the following: Kadesh li kol bechor. Right? So let's visit those two psukim that God did speak to him. Again, B'yadav Hashem al-Moshe, or God speaks to Moshe, and he says, Kadesh li kol bechor peta kol rechem b'fnei Yisrael. All the firstborn of the Jewish people are holy to me. Fine, so they're already holy. They belong to me. So our question, or the Alshich first question was, well, how have I got to make them holy? Kaddish, how do I make them holy if you're already saying they're holy to you? So he says the following thing, Kaddish nikol bachar lemer, Masha ani mevakesh michal. What I'm telling you is what I require from you is a different perspective. You're looking at this all wrong. That the mitzvah of Bechorim is for your benefit. They're already holy to me. That's true. But you making them holy, you separating them for me, or redeeming them for me, is giving you merits and giving you schusim. I don't need that. They're already holy to me. They belong to me. And Hashem says that elsewhere, he said that previously in Bamidbar Gimel, it's mentioned, Hashem already said that it was they are holy to me, the firstborn. And the kavod that I need from you is simply that you recognize that fact by giving them over to me or redeeming them. And you should know that I'm looking at this differently. In Mitzrayim, who did I kill? I killed the firstborn. That was the firstborn of the mother, which is our definition of firstborn, but also the firstborn of the father. So the firstborn of a father, that means to say that woman might have had a child from another husband, but the first child that comes from a woman from the father, even though it's not her firstborn, it's her firstborn, is still called a firstborn and was punished in the death of the firstborn. And not only that, if there is no firstborn, if there was a firstborn who died, and then a second child came along, but he, as it were, is elevated to the position of firstborn of the family, although he's not really so, he also died. But that's not how I look upon the Jewish people. As far as I'm concerned, for the Jewish people, it's only the firstborn of the mother. So there's a distinction between the way Hashem looks at the Jewish people and the way that Hashem, and that's what it says, Peter Rechem b'bnei Yisrael. I need you to sanctify Peter Rechem b'nei Yisrael, which is different to Peter Rechem elsewhere. I'm seeing you differently. But isn't it the same? Aren't we the same? Didn't we behave like the same? Hashem says, I see it differently. Don't look upon Jews the way the world looks at Jews. That would be a very important thing for Jews to bear in mind. But something else, and now we're going to Kabbalistic ideas. And the idea is that when the Rebbeinu Shalom at the original Passover, the first incident of the Bechorim in Mitzrayim, and the Jews being saved, the distinction between Egyptian Bechorim, firstborn, and Jewish Bechorim, who are ki makas Bechoris hayasa lachnia mazel pleh. Because makas Bechoris, the killing of the firstborn, was in part to weaken the effect of the mazel, which is called the tleh, the sheep that we mentioned before. Now this is astonishing because of all the mazalos And as the Earth rotates around the sun in its elliptical orbit, 365 and a quarter days, then it's passing near, in various months, other constellations, other groups of stars, which have an effect in this world. But the first group of stars, the first constellation to be created with the creation of the universe, was the Tle, the Egyptians, the first. And it was the firstborn constellation, the firstborn available Avodah Zorah, the firstborn, as it were, planetary force to exert influence in this world. And it was created in the month of Nisan, because the world was created in the month of Nisan. So there's a connection between that particular mazel and the firstborn. The month of Nisan is the month of the firstborn mazel, the Tle, and the firstborn of humanity connects to that, has an innate connection to it, is more affected, therefore, consequently, by it. It was the firstborn of the Mazolich. And its time, and where it's most potent, where influence is most, is the month of Nisan. They therefore are affected negatively by it more than anybody else. That's why they're going to need forever and ever a disconnect and a dedication to HaShem. They belong to me now. It means, and no, not that mazel. You have to recognize that fact. Those Becharim, those firstborn at the day of your first birth, you've got to recognize that child connects to me, not to anything else. Okay, they've got a special rule, therefore. And therefore, that's why the firstborn in Egypt had a special punishment, because they had a special role in Egypt in Avodah Zorah. It affected them. They already had a role, a negative, an anti-religious role or an anti-God role in Egypt. It had to be redeemed, had to be brought back. But the Jewish people might think, says the Alshich, and again, this is a question of perspective. The Jewish people might think, you know what? Okay, so there's a problem with the firstborn, but that's been corrected. It's been corrected by the fact that they were taken out from Egypt. And when we put the blood in the lintel, the fat, that was to protect them from being included in the death of the firstborn, to disconnect them from that, from the effects of that mazel. And therefore, from now on in, they're fixed, they're done, nothing to worry about. But that's not the case, because this mazel is this mitzvah of the firstborn goes through all the ages, all the millennia, and firstborn have to be redeemed forever. So the Jewish people might look at it differently and think it's done deal. They're okay. They've had their vaccination on the night of the Passover. They were vaccinated against the negative effects of the being a firstborn, and the ones that weren't vaccinated, spiritually vaccinated, they were the ones that who died, and they're done. Yes, all we need is one vaccine. You don't need a booster. Oh, I'm going to get in trouble for this metaphor. They don't need a booster. Yes, they do. It's an annual booster, which apparently we're all going to need forever and ever and ever until Bias Mashiach. So it says that. It would see that the firstborn were fixed by that event. Okay, Moshe Rabbeinu comes along and says, before he tells them, that's why he goes off, takes a diversion. That's the word I couldn't find before. And takes that diversion so that they don't think that, they don't make that mistake, and says, Zocher es Yom Hazeh. Remember that day. Remember that day. Leimer al yala aruchan. Don't let it occur to you, therefore, ki legol lo hayatzorah dam pesach. Don't think that in order to get out from Egypt, they didn't need the dam pesach, the blood of the Passover lamb, and the blood of the bris milah, al smach shavuos ha'omet, because it was guaranteed, because God had promised to take them out to the forefathers. And that the purpose of the blood was only to protect the Becharim. Now remember that day. Consider that day. Asher yira beinehem, asher yitzisim Mitzrayim b'yosef Mitzrayim v'lo ki lo kenu. When you yitzisim Mitzrayim, because you're going to think that that's all we needed the blood for, was to protect the Bechorim. And after that, we could get out because time was up and God had promised it. And therefore, we could simply walk out and we were done, and that was the end of Egypt. That's not the case. Ki Allah, lo me base avodim. That's why it says me base avodim. Not they took you out from freedom, it was a base avodim, a place. Let's not translate as what they translate the Ark Scroll, I've forgotten them already, from the house of bondage. No, it was a prison of slavery, a prison that you'll never get out of. And that's what he says. Kabbalistically, mystically, it was a place that no human being could ever escape from. It was in the nature of the tleh, nature of that mazel, nature of that astrological force that the Egyptians were able to plug into to create the Avodah Zarah, to be so tight, and it would not be possible for any slave to escape. As the rabbis make clear that the Mazal Mitzrayim gave them the ability that no slave would ever get out from there. So the blood that you think, that was protected the Bechorim, and therefore as the warrant was up, as the promise was fell due, the debt was to be paid, we could walk out of there? Not at all. That would have been insufficient. You'd have been stuck there forever. Because for HaShem to allow you to be able to get up there, he had to change the constellation. He had to move the stars and the planets in order to stop the energy that flowed from them being able to be secured by Egypt to stop the Jewish people going out. Okay, lo ala al derechim. So if I don't let it occur to you for a second, you yourselves walked out, not at all. Because the pasuk goes on to say, as the first pasuk goes on, it looks as though it's as though you're getting out yourself. The first pasuk, you went out from there. The Alshich saying what the pasuk means. That's how you will look at this. That's wrong. No, the guy, it's quite the opposite. You will tell your children, Hashem took me out from Egypt. That wouldn't have been enough. Just saving the firstborn, that wouldn't have been enough that we could have got out from there. We would still have been stuck there. It was HaShem who took me out from there. And that's an important perspective to have as well. Not to look upon yourself as though you did it. Because you were sunk in Avodah Zarah. You had 2 mitzvahs. And you know what? That was a good start. It wasn't enough to get you out from Egypt. Not from a place that innately didn't allow people to get out. It took the HaShem Yisborach's intervention and for him to change that place and change the reality. Who took me out mizeh. And that's what the pasuk says. It's very interesting, this. Let's just find the pasuk. Yeah, it says in pasuk Gimel, "V'yom Moshe elam zocher es hayom hazeh asher yotzei Mitzrayim." Hashem says, Jewish people, remember this day. Hashem took you up from base avodim. Can be yozet yod hoitze Hashem eskem mizeh. Because of the strong hand Hashem took you out from. Here is the translation, but it also means from this perspective, that you think you could have walked out yourself. You've done it, you've done enough. No, you haven't. It still took Hashem to rearrange the universe in order to get you out from its time. And by rearranging the universe, change the dynamic of the stars that created that Avodah Zarah. One last point. Let me quickly rush down to this Alshich, and I think this is a very, very important point. So even though I'm probably running over, I still want to share this with you. I want to emphasize more what it means. Remember this day. Why does the pasuk say? Why does Moshe tell them to remember this day before he goes back to the Mitzvah of Bechorim? I want you to see and realize. Look at it from God's point of view. See the chesed that he's done you. The enormity of it. Remember this day, it was the 15th of the month. That's when the mazel of the tleh is at its strongest. The 15th of the month is the full moon. That's when At that point, the closest to that mazel, that power, those powers that should have kept you there forever, HaShem defeated them for you. It wasn't you. It was HaShem doing this for you. Don't think you were tzaddikim and you deserve to get out. You did not deserve to get out. Now here he's going to go, and remember I pointed out to you before, when he says he's going to take you to the land of the Canaanite, and the go swaps to the singular. It's interesting because you're probably aware in Yirmiyah, the Pasuk says, also love in the future, Lo Yomer Asher Olon Hashem in Israel, Ki Im Asher Olon Eretz Sofin. When the Mashiach comes, people will no longer talk about the greatness of the miracles of Egypt. They will be as nothing compared to the miracles that are about to happen when the Mashiach comes and takes us from the lands of the north and the lands of the south and ends the exiles for good and rebuilds the third base of Mikdash. It's going to be so enormous that the miracles in Mitzrayim will simply seem small beer in comparison, to be, almost child's play compared to what Hashem has, as it were, Kaviyachol, up his sleeve, ready for us very shortly. And so he says, you might think that the fact that the Jewish people then went into the land of Canaan and fought against 31 kings and took the land of Canaan, well, it is not only a place that we got out from Egypt, a place which is so beautiful, we took the land of Israel, so it was a double blessing. That was itself, as it were, bigger than the mitzvahs of Mitzrayim. No, remember this day and keep these mitzvahs of matzah and macharim all through the generations, because you have to realize and you have to know that this is the biggie. This one is the biggie. But surely this is big. There were 31 kings as opposed to fighting in Egypt with only one king. And we defeated 31, that's a bigger thing. And we got the land of Israel, that's a bigger thing. Doesn't that obliterate, doesn't that eclipse the story of the Yetzias Mitzrayim? The answer is no, it doesn't. Because when the Jewish people went into Egypt, it was after 40 years, when they were tzaddikim, when they were united. And they were united, and that's why it says, that's why it spots to the singular. You come to the land of Israel, and Hashem is giving to you, and it's you in the singular. Well, it's them, it should be to all of you. No, but then they were united, and therefore that's why it speaks them in the singular. But they weren't united here. It's in the plural up till now. And yet, despite all the loss or all the lack of zechusim, of merits, Hashem still took them out. That shows you how he sees potential, and he sees things the way we don't see it. It's important to look at it from Hashem's point of view. And then you see a totally and utterly different picture. I'm sorry if this has been a little bit sniffly. I hope it was enjoyable anyway. I look forward to seeing you in good health for all of us next week. A very good Shabbos.